Today we will meet with Dr. Safaa El-Kogali. She is Regional Director for West Asia and North Africa at the Population Council. She is an economist who has been working in the development field for more than 18 years. Actually, her experience covers 15 countries in our continent, and that includes project management, research, and volunteer work. Her emphasis has been primarily on education, poverty, labor markets, and gender issues. Let's meet with Dr. Safaa El-Kogali. In this edition of Women's World, we are honored to have with us Dr. Safaa El-Kogali. She is the Regional Director for West Asia and North Africa at the Population Council. Thank you very much, Dr. Safaa, for being with us today. And let us start with the early beginning. Now, you obtained your education at the United States, right? Tell me about it.
First, I'd like to thank you for this meeting.
You're welcome.
I actually started my education in Sudan, where I'm from, up until second year of university at the University of Khartoum. I then transferred with my parents to the United States. My dad was working at the International Monetary Fund, and I obtained my bachelor's degree at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. And then after many, many years, and went and did a Master of Philosophy in Development Studies. My bachelor's degree was in economics. And I did my MPhil, Master of Philosophy, at the University of Sussex Institute for Development Studies in the UK.
And why did you choose this career in particular?
What career of development or economics?
Yes, and economics. I guess they are interrelated.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think when you are sensitive to the world around you, I grew up in Sudan when there was a lot of poverty around me. There were a lot of issues with refugees coming from neighboring countries. I felt I wanted to do something about it. And I was more interested in literature at the time.
Yes.
But I felt that through economics, you have much more leeway and power to influence policies and to help support programs that would help poor people and provide opportunities for a better future.
Is this why you worked for the World Bank?
It's absolutely why I worked for the World Bank. I applied for the World Bank's Young Professional Program a long time ago, probably 98 or 99. And in my interview, I actually said that if you wanted me to draw nice graphs and tell you that what you're doing is great, I'm not the right candidate. But I believe in making a difference in people's lives. I think the World Bank is a very powerful institution and has a lot of influence worldwide. And I felt that working at the World Bank, I have access to not just my country or my region, but actually the whole world.
And what is the experience that you gained from working there?
I worked there for about 9 or 10 years. I've worked on research issues, and I've also worked on programs on the ground, mainly on education. I've gained a lot. I've gained access to the world. I've gained knowledge about people's ways and cultures. We tend to have preconceived ideas about certain places and people, and we think we know. But unless you're actually on the ground and you meet people, you don't realize how much you really don't know. And I'll give you an example. One of my very first tasks or projects at the World Bank was a basic education expansion project in Yemen. And it was targeted at young girls from rural areas. And I was supposed to talk to the community to convince them why it's important for their girls to go to school. So we traveled to Yemen, we traveled to very remote villages up in the mountains, and I thought I know the culture. I'm from Sudan. I know Arabic culture, I know Islamic culture, and I know why they're not sending their girls to school. It's because of their cultural conservatism. And so I sat with the women in the community, and I said, so why don't you send your girls to school? And I expected to hear, you know, we don't send girls to school, and the response was, we don't have a school.
Oh.
And so very basic. And so I said, well, why would you send her to school? You marry her off at 14 anyways. She has to travel 3-4 hours to fetch water, 3-4 hours to fetch firewood. So why waste her time in school if you're going to anyways marry her so young? And why don't you train her to be more efficient in fetching water and firewood? And they got very angry. And they said, we want her to learn so she can know her religion. We want her to learn so she can learn how to look after herself and be clean. So they link it to issues of sanitation and to issues of awareness. One of them said, we want her to be like you. I pushed them further and I said, well, what would you give for your girls to go to school? If we need to build a school, what's your contribution? What if people are not going to come and build the school? They said, we will sell our gold. We will sell our jewelry to pay for...
So they were actually interested in education.
And very passionate. But that was an eye-opener for me, because we tend to usually stereotype a lot of these issues.
Yes.
The World Bank took me to West Africa. I've never been there. I've worked in an island on the Atlantic that has 500,000
Totally
people.
different.
Very different. I don't think a single Sudanese woman ever set foot there. But again, you actually work with people on the ground. You see the girls, the boys wanting to go to school, going barefoot to school, barely wearing anything.
With different problems.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I gained perspective, but I also gained knowledge about how to do projects and what works and what doesn't work. How do you talk to governments? And how do you try to convince them about why it's important to invest in girls, for example, why it's important to adopt a certain policy. It's very challenging.
Of course.
But it's also very rewarding when you see the actual effect.
Now, Dr. Safaa, I want to know from you the most important presentations and publications.
Wow.
I see many interesting stuff here. I see that you wrote about challenges and hope to be presented at Center for Universal Education. That was education in Iraq. right?
Ah, yes.
Education Iraq, gender dimensions in vocational training in Morocco.
Yeah.
I see promoting just economic development, since we spoke about the economic empowerment of women. I see women and work in Egypt. Now, this is very interesting for me. So tell me the most important one for you, particularly also women and work in Egypt. This is important.
Absolutely. Okay. I think each one has a story.
Okay.
But I'll pick the interesting stories. So the one presented at the Center for Universal Education, which was on education in Iraq. It was after the invasion of Iraq. I received an invitation because I was the person managing the education program for the World Bank in Iraq to come and present on the challenges that we faced in the work that we do. And I accepted the invitation, and after a week I received a confidential email telling me that the co-panelist is going to be the actress Angelina Jolie, but I'm not allowed to tell anyone because until they make a press release. And so I said, okay. And so it kind of added more pressure. What am I going to present in the presence of Angelina Jolie?
So this explains the photo now.
This explains the photo, precisely. So I asked them, what do you expect? And I worried also because this is part of the Council for Foreign Relations, which is a U.S. government entity.
Yes.
And I worried both as a World Bank employee who needs to be objective and not present arguments that would support any one side, but also as an Arab. How would my presentation be perceived?
Yes.
And so I thought, okay, if I present just facts and figures, and then I'm safe. And so the day the event came, and we all had to meet in the back, and there was Angelina Jolie, you know, an icon that everybody talks about. And so she said to me, are you going to give us the facts and figures? And I said, yes, I'll try to do that. And so we went up, and we had a third panelist, George Rupp from the International Rescue Committee. He's the president. So I said to him as we were going on stage, I said, I've never presented with a famous personality. How am I supposed to behave? And he said, nobody cares about you. They're all here to see Angelina Jolie. So
oops, what an answer.
we walk out. I said, okay, you know, that's fine. They present, Angelina was the first speaker, and she spoke passionately about refugee children and their desire for education. And when it was my turn, I started saying, well, you know, this is about refugees mainly, but my numbers were about education in general. And so I said, okay, I would like to then start with a poem from a 12-year-old girl from Sudan.
Nice.
And I read about 4 or 5 lines from a poem which I actually wrote when I was 12 in Sudan about refugees. And that's all I could remember was the 4 or 5 lines. And everybody was quiet. And then I said, well, you know, this 12-year-old is me. And everyone's like, oh, wow. And then I said, I had to catch your attention so that you can listen to me since I have Angelina Jolie next to me.
You stole the you stole the lights.
And everybody laughed. And I earned the picture, actually, the next day at the Washington Post in the first page of the World section.
Yes.
Which I wanted to share with you. The picture the article does not say much about my presentation, but it actually has a picture of me with Angelina Jolie looking at me, which I think acknowledged kind of what I said.
Yes.
So that to me was very interesting. The effect of it has just been massive. So I'm on every website, whether it's in Chinese writing or in Hindu writing, all over the internet with this picture.
Wow.
So that was one interesting presentation that I made.
Yes.
The one on just economic, I think, just development was
Yes.
about Sudan. at a crossroads.
Just economic development, yes.
And this came
That
at the
was
time.
2004.
Exactly. This was the time that North and South Sudan were negotiating a peace agreement. There was a lot of interest in South Sudan, and I was quite concerned about how a lot of the donors and a lot of the international community wanted to rush into South Sudan and pour a lot of resources. But how ready was South Sudan at the time for this? And so my presentation was basically raising a note of caution about how you need to help, and also making the case that two important members of society, or two important groups, have to be given specific attention, and those were the women and the youth.
Of course.
Not only as victims of the war that went on for many years, but also as agents of change. And I think looking back now, we're in 2010, and 6 years after I said that, we do, as the Population Council, does have a program in South Sudan, as well as we have an office in North Sudan.
Okay.
I see the importance of what I was actually saying then, now that South Sudan is full of NGOs and everybody's trying to do something, meaning well. But I think a lot of coordination issues and confusion at the time. And I think finally the one you mentioned was on women and work in Egypt.
Women and work in Egypt. 2002 that was.
That was in 2002. This was the result. This is a chapter in a book called The Egyptian Labor Market in an Era of Reform, that was edited by Dr. Ragi Assad, who actually was my predecessor here at the Population Council. He's an Egyptian American who was the regional director at the Population Council. He initiated the survey on the Egyptian labor market in 1998. And so I was part of the team that worked on the women in work section of the survey. And so the results of the analysis was this presentation I made, which is also a chapter that actually looks at the patterns of women's work. Where do women work? What kind of activities? What are their working conditions in terms of their salaries, in terms of their working hours? How do they actually use the money that they've earned? How much of it do they give to their families? How much of it do they keep for themselves? How much of it they use to buy things for themselves? And how empowering is that work for them? So this presentation was about that.
Well, that's all for this edition of Women's World. We hope you've enjoyed it, but it is not all for our interview with Dr. Safaa El-Kogali, Regional Director for the Population Council for West Asia and North Africa. Don't forget to join us again next week, because we will continue our discussion with her. So until then, it's goodbye. In the previous episode, we introduced you to Dr. Safaa El-Kogali, Regional Director for West Asia and North Africa, a senior economist, and she is also interested in development. She works for the Population Council, and she has a lot of achievements, but she also has a very interesting story with famous actress Angelina Jolie. Stay tuned. Now, I want to get back to the Population Council. What were the achievements of the Population Council in addressing the problem of overpopulation in the region, in Egypt and the whole region?
Population Council, as you may know, has been around for over 50 years. We're an international, non-governmental, non-for-profit organization based in New York with offices all around the world. The mission of the Council is to improve the reproductive health and well-being of populations around the world. Since its starting in 1952, and it was founded by John D. Rockefeller III, who is a member of the well-known Rockefeller family, a wealthy family in New York. His concern was that population growth was massive, and that we need to look for ways to help women have a choice to manage their fertility. And as such, a lot of the council focuses on research in terms of finding the causes and the environments that lead women to increase or reduce their fertility. And initially we looked at the biological aspects, and we have labs in New York that have tested different interventions that could help women plan their families. In fact, I think latest statistics show that 200 million women have unmet needs for contraceptives to help them manage their fertility and choose when they want to have children. 100 million use contraceptives that were developed by the Population Council. Since the early 1950s, the Council had worked in developing these products to allow men and women have choice in managing their fertility. We then moved on to do more social work, to try and understand the environment as to why women tend to have more children. And in the region, particularly in the West Asia, North Africa region, we've been active since the early 70s in trying to understand the issues of reproductive health in the countries of the region. We've been an active participant in the 1994 population conference that was held here in Cairo, as you may know. We've developed major reports that have guided policies in terms of what the issues are. And so what you see today, you have countries like Iran that have managed to reduce their fertility tremendously, like Tunisia, like Lebanon. And then you have Egypt, which actually starting in the 1960s had a very strong move towards fertility decline, and which started declining from about, I believe, 5% in the early 1980s, late 1970s, reaching 3.5 in the 1990s, but then it stalled. And I think there's a lot of interest and curiosity now among policymakers in Egypt to understand why did it stop declining? What are the reasons? I have some documents that I'll be happy to share with you, which show some of the studies we're trying to do, or we've done actually, in terms of fertility transition in Egypt. This is one report that we've recently produced to help understand the reasons. Some of these reasons are unmet needs for contraceptives, is that women don't have the facilities to be able to control their fertility. Some believe out of cultural reasons they cannot use any interventions. Others don't have access to interventions. And so we're hoping to raise awareness, and we work very closely with ministries in the region, such as the Ministry of Health, and currently the State Ministry of Family and Population.
Yes.
We're very pleased to have a champion like Ambassador Mushira Khattab, who's been pushing forward a lot of these issues
Very
as
active.
well, very actively. But we also try to address it from the very beginning, when girls are still adolescents. What is their understanding about their bodies and about their opportunities, and what are their rights in terms of their reproductive rights, the control over their own bodies. These girls, a lot of the time, especially in rural areas in Upper Egypt, they don't even have opportunities of schooling. So we try to create programs. We actually have a very successful program called Ishraq that addresses out-of-school adolescent girls, that helps them achieve literacy, numeracy, but also life skills, to understand issues of reproductive health, to understand why it's important not to get married at 14 when your body is still developing, why you need to wait to the legal age of 18 before you can get married and before you can start having children, so that you can have healthy children, you can continue to be a healthy woman,
Mother,
to bear more healthy children.
of course.
So we're trying to address it from different dimensions to help reduce fertility, and I think that's very important for development. The resources are scarce and they're limited, and as long as the population continues to grow at the rate that it's growing, and you have a lot of the natural resources depleting, such as water in this region,
And food.
and food. The fertile land for us to grow food is also depleting. So I think it's important for populations to understand what this actually means for them. And so this kind of translating these slogans of fertility decline and to the
Into actual work.
and language that the lay person will understand, whether
yes.
they're in Ina or in Suhag, or that they know why it's important for them to be careful in terms of having one child every year.
Yes.
For as long as the woman can have children. So we're working with NGOs as well in the field. We work with international organizations. Partnerships is a very important area for the Population Council to achieve the results that we hope to achieve.
Now, Dr. Safa, I want to ask you what are the main issues, or what were the main issues that challenged you the most? They are a lot, I'm sure.
Sure, absolutely. I think it's interesting. An issue that I had recurrently is we work with, whether I was doing research and going to the field, or whether I'm working for the World Bank and talking to ministers, or now at the Population Council. I think being a female from a Middle Eastern country and looking young, I'm not saying I am young, but looking young, kind of gives people the impression that, oh, she's just a junior person and we're not going to pay too much attention to her. So that was a major challenge in a lot of places. And challenges like this, the best way to deal with them is you sort of see the humor in them. And I would always say, well, the person who's leading this mission or the person who's representing this office is little me. But let's talk and get into a conversation, and we'll see how we can help you.
Okay.
Other challenges is really understanding people's perspectives and where they're coming from. A lot of the time we think we know what the problem is and we're coming to offer a solution. But I think the biggest challenge is to really understand the problem before coming forward with a solution for that. Challenges of travel. There's a lot of travel in the work, in the development work. You travel to places that are not necessarily well equipped in terms of services. And then challenges of putting it all together and making sense of all of it. And the so what question is, what does this mean? How will this actually improve someone's life at the end of the day? Whether it's a report or a project or a conference.
Well, I see so many interesting topics here, but unfortunately I cannot cover them all. But I see also a very interesting one, which is youth livelihood opportunities in Egypt. That was 2001. So tell me a bit about that presentation.
This is part of a report that I've conducted jointly with a wonderful Egyptian colleague, Nagah Hassan al-Basusi. We basically tried to look at young women's opportunities of work or for work. We look at the laws and how the laws can actually help or constrain young women getting work. So one chapter of it was about that. Another one, we look at the patterns where they are. So building on the work that was done with the Egypt Labor Market Survey, where they are currently, and how they're empowered through their work. And then Nagah, my colleague, actually went to the field and conducted interviews with these girls, especially the ones working in the garment industry, to see what their environment is like, their work environment, the issues that they face as working girls, because they're young girls, and what does that mean in terms of their marriage opportunities, etc. All these reports are available here at the Council. You're welcome to use them. And I think if people visit our website, www.popcouncil.org, they can actually see a lot of the work that we've done.
And you have certainly achieved a lot, and I have certainly enjoyed talking to you. So thank you very much for being with us in Women's World.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed this as well.
Well, that's all for this edition of Women's World. We hope you've enjoyed it. And don't forget to join us again next week, same time, with more interesting stuff, especially for you women. Until then, it's goodbye.